Hey there. So in the past, I remember the type of shill organizations that would go out and push comic books. I remember those that would push any type of comic book too and tell you that they're good. Now these days, the shilling, it's become a different sort of beast. And I mean that not only with comic books, but with any hobby out there. Whether we're talking about, say, video games, talking about sci-fi, heck, talking about politics, there are shill organizations out there. They have changed the face of what they talk about. Now instead of just talking about comic books, they add ideology and on, but they shill everything that this industry does. What's more is they back these plays to the detriment of the industry, and that is something that's kind of bothersome when you see where the industries are, what they need to be doing, and what they're doing instead. I mean, when you see articles like this where they're talking about X-Men Black Mojo and the savage satirization of the comic book industry, what they're really talking about is attacking fandom, attacking consumer, and saying that's A-okay. Now, a Marvel can get away with that too. They deal in intellectual properties. They make more than enough money to make up currently for any offset that we would see within comic books. The problem is, down the line, once you get past, say, the big two, well, you start seeing the hits. If we're talking about Image, we're talking about individual creators out there having their works represented in a diminishing market return. When we're talking about, say, IDW, well, we've talked about those numbers. They're pretty bad. And on. We keep seeing proof of this problem, and yet still we have shills out there telling you that everything's fine and that this is great because. Now, when I'm talking about the industry too, I want you to really picture the comic book industry as it is. Currently, year-to-date 2018 versus year-to-date 2017, and 2017 is one of the worst years that they have seen in a long, long time. When you look at comic books, they basically rely on gimmicks. They rely on milestones. They go out, they reboot, and they reboot, and they reboot, and they hit milestones within that. They also increase the pricing point to a level unseen ever, and yet they've only made 1% more profit. All the while, they've seen a 6.78% downturn in units, meaning they're negative from last year, and last year was a very, very bad year. When you combine in graphic novels within that, the thing that they say makes everything better, well, it's even worse. I mean, you're looking at an industry that is, again, reliant on gimmicks and that is shipping out units because this is shipment. This is numbers based on shipment, not actual sales to consumers. The consumer numbers, they're much, much worse if you go by what comic book shops have been saying. If you look, too, at how many books have come out, I really want you to think about this. So you see how many books came out last month. This will be for August. You had 464 books. Now, out of that, 24 books total shipped over 50,000 units. If you're talking about 20,000 units, only 121 of those books managed to stay above the 20,000 unit threshold. That's where comic books are. You're looking at an industry that is in dire disarray, that needs consumers, and yet their shill media is going out and telling you that this kind of stuff, it's A-okay. So let's look at this article here. For those of you lucky enough to have avoided any and all social media posts regarding it, we regret to inform you that there's a strange divide among comic book fans right now. Yes, as silly as it sounds, it's true. There are rival factions battling over the soul of 22-page funny books about super-powered people in capes. It's a strange time we live in, yet here we are. For the sake of brevity, we'll just say the belligerents are in two very different camps, and the following will be an explanation of them in the broadest sense. Now, you can see the gospel of minimization already when we talk about professionalism and we talk about good products, well, it doesn't matter. It's just people fighting over these silly little things out there. Now, when you look at the way that people represent those silly little things out there, well, it's a totally different thing. And yet, when we're talking about this as consumers, again, the gospel of minimization, because you don't want to hear those people out there. So continuing, the first is a group of comic book fans and creators who feel the mainstream comic industry has forced diversity and politics into comics. Now, I hate this wording right here, forced diversity. It's not diverse to add a qualifier to something and to simply call it diverse. If I went out and changed, say, Blade's skin color, is that diverse? They would say no. However, if I went out and I changed, say, Superman's skin color, slapped him on the screen, would that be diverse? Yes, that would be diverse. So you see exactly what they're calling diversity. That's not diversity. That's also not representation. Representation is throwing something out that people can actually see, that they can understand, and that defies the qualifier. You know, it speaks to the betterment of self. It speaks to something more. Then going off of that, again, with the politics in comics, you know, these folks always want to go out and they want to represent this notion. There have always been politics in comics. You know, I never saw Sean Hannity's name coming out of a Batman mouth. I never saw things like that, but I'm seeing that now. The characters out there that have legacy, it's being diminished. It's basically like we're seeing the sheen and the shine fall off. And more, we're seeing the person behind that. The people behind that too, well, they look more and more petty every day. So if you're talking about politics in comic books, well, I think you need a little bit more definition. Like when we see Lady Thor not wanting to fight people because, well, they don't want to fight a female because feminism. Or if we see another thing within Lady Thor where you have your bad guy talking about meninist MRA stuff and whatnot, that's literally what they put in. Or if you're talking about putting in things like going to the fertility clinic and being misgendered in a Batgirl comic, yeah, there are things in there you kind of don't expect to find. But continuing, quick side note, introducing a new character is not the same as forcing them into a book. Did we say anything about introducing a new character? Now, of course, what they want to throw out there, they throw out things like Riri later on. Now, Riri, the problem has been the way that Riri is written. You know, a character that basically has everything given to them. They never overcome any kind of adversity. Everyone stands up and cheers for them. And what's more, the people that are being hired on to write them, well, go and look at their social media. I would invite you to go and check that out. Because it's not just like a train wreck. It's like a train wreck, you know, where you see basically the remnants, well, they pop out in this current year version of White Sheets. But continuing on, and believe 1990s comic book aesthetics were the pinnacle of the median. Yeah, that's not even the thing there, too. You know what people want? They want escapism in their medium. They want to be able to go out and enjoy legacy characters. Legacy characters, you know, characters that have this built-in legacy. I know that's really hard for these people to understand. They are supposed to shepherd that forward. They are supposed to do it justice, and yet they don't. I mean, when I'm looking at the X-Men these days, I'm not looking at the teams that I once saw. I'm not looking at them going out and beating some kind of profound insane madmen in, say, Age of Apocalypse. No, I'm going out and seeing them fight the wage gap, or I'm seeing them fight bigotry and, you know, mustard, basically with your hot dog there. And I'm also looking at them, of course, collecting hashtags and utilizing them to bring down enemies. Yes, those are actual storylines too. But continuing, the other side of the coin is, well, a rather large swath of comic book creators and fans who have taken a stance against the opposition that has rallied behind the banner of Comicsgate. So you don't describe those folks. You're just describing them as the quote-unquote good guys in your story. Got it there. Love how you do that. Also, just to note, CBR does not allow discussion of this topic. If you try to discuss it in their forums, no, can't talk about it. But of course, they can talk about you. They can point the finger and they can say that you're an ist, you're a phobe, and all of these things. But of course, when you try to talk about it, no. They don't interview people from one side of that spectrum to talk about exactly what's going on. Oh, no. And even if they did, I would imagine the representation there would be pretty ugly. But anyhow, continuing. Now, if you don't know what Comicsgate is, good for you. Try to keep it that way. But for those of you who have working knowledge of the vitriol that has been broadcast online, X-Men Black Mojo #1 might be the funniest satire on the whole ordeal thus far. Writer Scott Ackerman and artists Nick Bradshaw and Andre L.A. They have used the ratings-obsessed interdimensional television mogul Mojo to thoroughly explicate the current comics feud, saddling the villain with familiar, less than desirable attributes so as to provide a deft characterization of the comic book curmudgeon. He strolls around New York in a trench coat and a fedora, milady, and claims to not need any sort of compassion despite desperately searching for it. Framing the character in such a way might be a bit too on the nose for some, but for a broad satire it works wonderfully. The blatant jabs Mojo makes at the comic book industry only add to this side of the character. Now, what's really interesting is that they're talking about they're saying that comic book fans are maladaptive. Not the comic book creators out there that basically talk about having small community and ushering in this type of gatekeeping where no one challenges or checks any of their notions. Oh no, it's those poisonous fans out there. The ones that you're trying to drive off in droves. And maybe this kind of stuff, it might get you the currency of Twitter likes, but I hate to tell you that you can't go in, even in, say, Canada, and trade in my likes and my fifis for my money, because it doesn't work that way. But continuing on to page 2 of this, Mojo complains about new characters muddying up the waters and eclipsing classic characters, despite the fact that the old characters are still there and past exploits are unaffected by any new character introductions. When you look at the new characters versus the old characters, some of the characters, they are just bottom of the barrel sometimes. Not only that, but when you look at the exploits of classic characters, when you look at those characters, it's like people have forgotten how to actually write escapism. They go out and instead stand on the soapbox, insult fandom by pointing their fingers this way and that, and saying, you folks, you're not welcome here. I would recommend that people take that as gospel and they walk away too. If someone is telling you that you're not wanted, maybe you need to listen to them. When you look at some of the people out there that have tried to be heard, they've been talking about decades of collecting, decades of going and supporting a company that had some of the worst years imaginable, only to see the people like, say, a Joe Quesada side with a troll out there that has been in comics less than a year and that basically needs this kind of connection because, of course, they're going to bad guy the consumer and stand up for the monolith Disney, the poor, unfortunate soul that it is. Yeah, says plenty. But continuing, ironically, 2 of the visual representations of this complaint are Quentin Quire and Dupe, 2 huge favorites in the X-Men fan community, and characters who have been backup players to Wolverine and X-Men, who, even in death, is in more comics than either Quire or Dupe combined. Yeah, and you look at the quality of the comic books that Wolverine has been in. If you actually looked at the paper stock lately, that stuff diminishes. Have you looked at the way that comic books, they won't actually make it, say, past a year? You have to reboot them. And there's a continual reboot with 20 to 40 covers. LCS killers out there. But none of that matters. Oh no, does not matter at all. But continuing on, to be fair, not every little snipe is unwarranted. Mojo notices on his cell phone that viewership ratings have dipped. He wonders if perhaps killing off a character will boost them. This is definitely commenting on how cheap superhero deaths often are, and how they feel like nothing more than sales tag instead of a natural story beat. Within that, you should be looking at that even more and asking about the slipping sales. Why do we see an entire industry turn down of around 10% for physical and around 6% overall last year? What happened there? Why are we seeing this continuance when it comes to physical locales? Oh no, of course, they're not going to ask that question, because if they ask that question, well then, they would realize that stuff like this, it causes that. You know, you can have people go out and enjoy a story, but if that story is centered around a middle finger pointed at fandom, yeah, it doesn't exactly fly, does it? But continuing on, the real meat of this issue is the way in which Mojo grapples with the outside world, something that can be hard to do when your head's buried so deep in the exploits of fictional characters that it engulfs your life and your better judgment. So again, they're talking about fandom. They're talking about consumers not having common sense. You know, the people out there that, again, go and earn money to pay for these commodities that aren't necessary within life. You know, we're talking about escapist platforms. Yeah, that's the way to go, because people, they get to the point where they can drop these things, and they can drop them pretty well. That first comic is hard to drop. By the fifth comic, you don't even care anymore. I mean, you find out that you have more and more money coming in, and well, that money can go anywhere but towards something that disrespects you. Continuing, and in a very sly manner, Ackerman and company sort of let slip the answer to ending this whole debacle in the comic book community. Not everything has to go the way you want in order for you to be happy. No, you can walk away. I mean, really, disrespecting people with something like this, yeah, good way to go. Now, I like this part here. You know, the cycles come and go in pop culture. Comic books are no different. What was once the norm erodes over time. Either adapt or live in the past. The choice is yours. Fighting on the internet over it isn't doing anyone any good. Yeah, you know, because we're not talking about livelihood. We're not talking about discrimination that has been set up. Oh no, like you say, the gospel of minimization, where you talked about this at the beginning. Also, cycles come and go. Do you remember the last cycle that we actually saw? We saw a cycle that ended up with Marvel begging somebody to bail them out of bankruptcy. If they didn't have that Disney FU money, well, they're in a worse place than they were then. Yeah, so I think that says a lot. But continuing, luckily it seems most fans are just trying to find works of art to gravitate toward and stories they can relate to on a personal level. What more can you ask for, really? If goofy, vaguely apolitical 90s comics with gory violence and extreme artwork is what you dig, bully for you. Comics like that are still being made, just not at the level they once were. Again, diminishment of what is going on. And you know, when I was talking about X-Men these days, so if you look at X-Men Red, you'll notice this hallmark there. You don't have a lot of action. What you do is you have a lot of people standing around, being too cool for that new school. You know, they're going to stand, they're going to pose, maybe they'll run a few times. You might even get an action scene on, say, 3 of the comic book pages out of your entire 22 to 26. Doesn't that make you want to buy? And again, increasing pricing point there. What's more, if these things become a soapbox for this kind of thinking, if they become a soapbox where you can attack fandom and say those people are an outlier or an out-group there, well, how do you think that the professionals that are out there saying, yeah, all we want to do is serve all of our consumers, how do you think they get treated? See, I've even seen certain professionals out there say, hey, you know, if I went on and I talk to these folks, I'm going to have a problem. If I go on YouTube and talk to certain ones, that's not going to work out for me. That tells you exactly where the industry is. That talks to gatekeeping. It talks to problems out there where, again, minimization like this and shilling. Yeah, you may be able to throw out a few paragraphs to say, these are the folks there. But really, does that work out? But continuing on, if you want to see characters who represent your race, gender, ethnicity, or social upbringing, there's nothing wrong with that. If you can't relate to Riri Williams on a personal level, then no one is forcing you to read the comics she's in, but it's not fair to begrudge readers who enjoy them, period. Mojo understand that, but can everyone else? So, it's okay to begrudge people that enjoyed comic books, when they sold at millions of comic books. But, this niche thing that we've created here where we have characters that you want to say are basically qualifiers for race, gender, ethnicity, social upbringing, and on. Yeah, the thing that you're missing there are the standards behind that character, the thing that makes them great. That's what you're missing here. What's more, I wonder how this guy would respond if, say, I don't know, Marvel went in and they modeled Mojo, who looks a bit like this guy, if they modeled him after him. What if they went out and what if they targeted you? See, I don't think you would take that as well. I think you would go out and I think you would throw a fit. I think you would see that as a betrayal. Of course, that's what a lot of folks feel like now, that they're being betrayed by a medium that they threw their money in. Because every time they try to speak out about problems there, well, they're maligned. And not only that, the industry, it allows its attack dogs here to go out and try to basically misrepresent, mislead, and throw things to the ground. And that does not work at all. But you tell me what you think about this stuff. I mean, do you think that Mojo was actually modeled after this dude? Oh my goodness. Maybe that's what he needs to be focusing on instead of all of that other stuff. Or is that mean of me to say? Because if that's mean of me to say, then again, maybe going out and calling people racists, calling people sexists or Nazis, or saying, they're running around in hats and, trench coats and fedoras, miladying all the time while complaining about something that you minimize there, when you're talking about them spending their money. Maybe that's disrespectful too. Just something to think about. But anyhow, you tell me what you think. So if you like this kind of content, please consider supporting the channel. How can they support the channel? They hit that like, what is it called?
Like.
Yeah, liking. Liking is very good. What is that other thing they can do as well? Subscribe, that's right. What does subscribing get them?
Cool stuff.
Cool stuff, yeah. Get all cool new videos. Then they can go to the Patreon link. Patreon link has all kinds of stuff too, doesn't it? It has your videos, right? Yeah, like the forest and on. There's also the PayPal link, which allows them to tip. And you like using tips. You buy toys, don't you?
Yes, and that's what I do to buy toys.
Yeah, you love to buy toys. And then there's also merchandise. Can you say, hey there?
Hey there.
That is a hey there shirt. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Now here, too, is the Tug Glug coffee mug. Can you say that?
Tug Glug coffee mug, and that really contacts everything.
It does contact everything. There are also 3 different kinds of coffee cups up there. They can look through them all. Yeah, what? 3? Then there's the detective one. This is HP TUGCRAFT and the wokeness of the damned. Isn't that scary? Look at those coming for him. And we also have this continuing shirt too. He's like, no. Continuing. Can you say continuing?
Continuing.
That's right.
Why is he like, no?
Because there's so many bad things. But he knows it'll be better, right?
Yeah, if anything, like a ninja or some monsters fight them.
Yeah, that's right. Ninjas, everything else. That's a good idea. But they have to get that shirt to have that, don't they?
Yes.
Yes, definitely. Man, I need a shirt.
To say yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. You want to say yes?
Yes.
Though, buy that shirt. Right. Can you say bye now?
Bye.
And tell us what you think.
Good.
All right. Thank you.